Alright, so now we have to figure out how to adjust the bullet seating and crimping die. And let me get this out of here so I can start over real quick for you. This is a bullet seating and crimping die here. And what we have is this part that screws in. There's lots of different designs. RCBS has a little bit different of a design here. Let me show you one of those guys. This one just has a little nut you screw on top. And this deal controls how far in your bullet's going to be seated, is by how far in you have this screwed in or out. This lock ring, how far you have the entire die screwed into the press here, is going to determine your crimp, okay? And the way that works is we're going to have our case. It's going to go up into the die, and at a certain point, almost at the very top of the stroke, it's going to encounter a part in on the inside of the die where you have kind of little metal corners that are going to touch the edge of this case mouth. And when you ram it up just that final tiny amount, it's going to crimp that tight on the bullet. Now for bullets with cannulars, which is a little groove around the the outside of the bullet, crimp is probably going to be the way you're going to go. For like semi-autos, if you're loading AR-10s or a real heavy recoiling rifle, sometimes crimps are good to have to ensure the bolt doesn't move in and out. Most long-range precision applications, actually we're going to be using bullets without a cannular, such as this little Hornady AMAX here. And this doesn't have a cannula. There's no groove there, so we're not going to have a crimp on there. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust this die first for the crimp, and then we're going to determine how we want to seat the bullet. So let's put the case in, okay? And we're going to go all the way up to the top of the stroke. And we're going to back off on this locking ring. And we're going to back off on this bullet seating part here. Now we're going to screw this in until we feel it just touch the case mouth. Okay, so I can feel it right there touching the case mouth. It looks like it's hitting here, but it's not. Okay, now if I wanted to have a crimp, what I would do is I'd back off on this, and I would just go a little bit of a turn more, and that would give it a nice solid crimp, okay? Because the further in you go, the more of a crimp you're going to have. Now I don't want to crimp actually, because I'm not going to crimp these, so I'm going to just go right up to the case mouth, and I'm going to back off a little bit. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're just going to set it right here. Okay? There we go. Now, after that, that's set up for a no crimp. If we did want to crimp, like I said, we would have moved it in a little bit farther and it would start crimping a little bit. If you're experiencing some of these cases starting to get crimpled or crunched in there, they might be a little bit too long. So it's very important, like we talked about earlier, to have these cases all exactly the same length, or you could experience some problems there. So next thing we're going to do before we obviously get our bullet seated and figure out the length for that is we're going to want to make sure we have a powder charge, and I have one already measured out here. So here's our 43.1 grains Reloader 19. Make sure that's in there, because once you get these bullets seated in here, it's not going to want to come back out. Okay? So we got our powder charge, now we're going to seat it with a bullet. We have this adjusted for our crimp level, and we already got this backed off a little bit. So what you're going to do is you're going to basically seat the bullet, and then you're going to determine the length, the cartridge length you want to have. You can use a caliper here, and you can determine your cartridge overall length. And I want this seated a little deeper than what I have it here. So we're just going to go ahead and adjust this in a little farther. Let's try that. And actually have it marked off on this die. So the more you screw this in, the deeper your bullet's going to seat. Okay. There we go. Let's see if that's right. So whatever your cartridge overall length is, that's what you're going to want to accomplish here. Right, we're dead on. Basically, I have these loaded at 2.70 is what I have these loaded to. Okay? So another trick you can do, if you already have a cartridge that you want to duplicate the basic cartridge overall length and the crimp, you can back off on the die, put this to the top of the stroke, and then back off on this bullet seating part, and you can just screw the die in until you touch that shoulder, and then snug up the die at the top of the stroke, real nice and snug to that. And then lock down your lock ring, because that's where you're going to have it adjusted. And then what you're going to do is you're going to back off, and you're going to put this back down, and you're going to turn this bullet seating part into the die until you're snug up against the bullet. And that should give you a real close adjustment to where that loaded cartridge was. So that's kind of a trick to getting there quick and easy. But if you're starting from scratch, you want to start as backed off on everything as you can so you don't accidentally either smash the case or seat the bullet way too deep. If you do seat the bullet too deep, you're going to have to get it out of there either with a bullet puller. Hopefully you have one. If you don't, you're going to have to destroy this bullet and yank it out with a vice grip or something. But a bullet puller is probably the better way to go, obviously. Alright, so that's basically how to adjust these. Pretty simple and straightforward. Like I said, case length is crucial. So if you have inconsistent case lengths and you're crimping these, you're going to run into some major problems. You want to make sure your case lengths are all exactly the same, especially if you're crimping. And I would recommend crimping on a cannular bullet for particularly a heavy recoiling rifle or like a semi-auto. So we're not going to use a crimp on this. We're just going to load it in and put no crimp on it. So that simplifies things a little bit for adjusting this die here. So I already have this pre-adjusted, and I have it marked with my little marker on the ring and threads there, and I have this already adjusted as well. That's marked. This is very critical. Once you get this thing adjusted, and that's the load you're going to keep, you're going to want to make sure that you don't change that, because tiny variations in crimp are going to make a huge difference with your pressure curve, and bullet seating depth is going to be similar as well. Now, a lot of guys ask, what's a good bullet seating depth? How close to the lands do you want the bullet to be? Well, ideally, you'd want it as close as possible without touching. You don't want it to be in the lands right off, but you do want it to be very close. However, in most rifles, you're going to be limited due to magazine space, so you're going to have the cartridge overall length be a certain length. You can't have it too long or it won't feed through magazine, even in blind magazines. So that's one limitation. If you have a single shot, you can load it as long as you want. But so that's usually the limiting factor. Most guys do use magazines in their rifles. Cartridge overall length you're going to want to adjust so that it fits in your magazine. If you're using a single shot, get as far forward as you can to where you're just barely almost touching the lands, and you should be golden. So let's run through a few of these here. So, take out our case. We have this set a little bit light. I'm going to wait a second for the powder to fill that up. Dump it in. Verify my charge. Should be set a little bit light. If it's not, it'll be right on. So I'm waiting for the scale to catch up. And actually this one, because there is a little bit of variation in these, this volume is going to have different weights because the grains orientate themselves differently. So that's about perfect. So that one we don't have to trickle. I'm going to use my little funnel. Put it in. Get a bullet. Now a lot of guys, you want to seat this in there like so, carefully. Put it in here. You want to make sure it's fully seated in the shell holder. Now when we're going in, I want this as straight as I can go, but I want to go very slow and careful. If I just violently ram this up in here, you could have the bullet misaligned in the case, and that will cause problems later on. We'll get into that in advanced external ballistics. A lot of guys like to turn the case and go in and out as they go in, trying to keep this bullet centered and straight. And that works too, but actually if you just go very slowly, this thing has a self-centering bullet seating deal. So it'll actually self-center. If you go nice and slow and careful, it'll do a very good job getting it perfect. So you don't have to turn it around in there if you don't want to. Some guys do that just for peace of mind. But there we go. We got 2 cartridges. Let's do one more. Okay. So just as a repeat here, let all the powder get in here. Dump it. Verify. I might have to go a little lighter on this if these are going to come out a little bit heavy. Okay, so if you do have a heavy one, well, that's kind of nice that happened. I'll just dump it back in here. I'm going to turn this in a little bit to reduce the volume. Now it should be lighter. That way I can trickle right up to exactly where I want to go. So now it should be lighter. Okay, see, it's significantly lighter over here. So I'm going to just turn this, and I'm going to trickle them in. And if you can see the weight increasing, we want to get it right on 0 as I trickle. So it's getting close. And any kind of air movement in the room will move the scale around. It's very sensitive. But there we go. We're right on 0. And that's probably the most efficient way to get this done. So I'll load this in here. Be very careful. It's nicely seated. Get it in there. Now I'm gonna. This is the part you want to go very slow on. Let it self-center. Just push it in like that. Make sure you got all the way in. Good. So we're golden. Now for semi-autos, you may want to crimp. Our bullets with the cannula. In that case, we'd adjust this die a little bit differently, like we said in the instructions. You'd adjust it just till you feel the case mouth, and just a little more. And if you need more crimp, you just turn it a hair. It doesn't take much. If you do run into crinkling of the case during this step, if the case smashes, you either had a long cartridge that you forgot to trim that was too long and it was crimping way too far, or it got smashed in there, or something else is happening. But if you have your length just right and you go careful, you should have no problems. I haven't crinkled a case in years and years, so we're golden. All right, one more, and then we'll just do all these. There's lots of different videos on YouTube that I've actually seen that are very, very good. I could go for years explaining reloading if I wanted to, but we need to get moving on the rest of the topics. So I'm just going to give you some pointers and tips. And I would encourage you guys to look around. I forget the guy's name, but there's some guys who are really, really good who get into great detail on reloading. And there's no need for me to be redundant and repeat what they have said when you can just go check out their work. But they'll give you lots of pointers and tips too. And they might beg to differ a little bit on some of my techniques, but that's fine. As long as whatever you decide to do, whatever technique you decide to use when you're doing any of these steps, you just want to make sure you do it with perfect consistency. That is the key to getting good ammunition.